there's this long line of corruption by federal agencies targeting American citizens in retaliation for the exercise of their First Amendment rights. It happened to the Tea Party. It happened to President Trump. And as far as I'm concerned, it happened to the January 6ers. New lawsuit I can announce against the IRS on potential targeting of January 6th defendants. So what happened is the IRS was asked to, as is usually done with the left Democrats, to target their political opponents, namely January 6 people, people who are supporting January 6 defendants, you name it. And Judicial Watch asked for documents of the IRS for information about any targeting. And we got, again, the proverbial hand to the face, and we had to sue in federal court for the information. For example, there was this report on January 19th from NPR earlier, I think it was last year. IRS is called to look into nonprofit for January 6 rioters. So there was a nonprofit, evidently, that was supporting the January 6 defendants. And what happened is Democratic members of Congress called for the IRS to scrutinize the nonprofit. And as a result, I suspect the nonprofit was probably scrutinized. So, for example, there was a report at NPR that Democrats wanted to target something called the Patriots Freedom Fund that was supporting January 6th defendants. And they told the IRS to look into them because they thought they were, quote, too political or otherwise violating IRS regulations. And then Senator Ron Wyden, W-Y-D-E-N, the Democrat from Oregon, leading Democrat, sought a broad IRS investigation of all groups associated with the January 6th protests. So we had asked quite broadly for information from the IRS about anything targeting January 6ers. We asked for records of IRS officials, including the then commissioner, the acting commissioner, the chief tax compliance officer, and others that mentioned President Trump or the Capitol protesters, plus all records referring to plans for audits of the protesters, their supporters, or related nonprofits. So this is a pretty comprehensive investigation. We're auditing the IRS's potential targeting of January 6ers. Now, do we know without a shadow of a doubt that the IRS engaged in improper targeting or politicized targeting? No. Why is it we're asking? Why is it we suspect? Because the IRS has a demonstrated record of being used by the left and the Democrats to target their political opposition. And most infamously, back in 2010, 11, 12, the IRS targeted essentially the entire Tea Party and other political opposition to President Obama in a quite obvious fashion in terms of the political impact of what their plan was, which was to suppress any opposition, especially the organic Tea Party movement, in the run-up to the 2012 re-election campaign of Barack Obama. And Judicial Watch took the lead in exposing the corruption, the misuse of IRS information, the false information the IRS was putting out about the targeting of Tea Party groups, conservative leading groups, their donors. And we uncovered, for instance, how the Justice Department and the FBI was also coordinating with the targeting of Tea Party groups. In fact, they were thinking of ways to jail and prosecute the leaders of these very groups. So yeah, we think something's up. Is Lois Lerner still in the IRS? No. But of course, Lois Lerner was never prosecuted. Another outrage in terms of failed accountability, even though we had all the evidence in the world for anyone to prosecute her. But the attitude, you can be sure, remains. And the IRS received letter after letter and was pressed repeatedly by Democrats back during the Obama days to target the Tea Party groups. So when you see similar activity, we should be concerned that there is resulting politicized targeting by the IRS, in this case, of Biden's political enemies. Heck, during the Biden regime, they weaponized virtually all the federal agencies against Trump and his supporters. Why would we think they wouldn't have weaponized the IRS? And, there was this other story of an individual, I think it was a contractor with the IRS, who was caught, convicted, prosecuted, but on a very narrow set of charges, given how broad the theft of records was of that this guy engaged in. He basically took the records of potentially thousands of taxpayers, it looks like including Trump's, and then leaked them to the media in an effort to essentially attack the so-called rich and to attack Trump. And the Obama, excuse me, I guess it's a Freudian slip. The Biden Justice Department let him off with, relatively speaking, a slap on the wrist. So there's a game afoot in the IRS, I have no doubt. And another piece of the evidence that there's a game afoot is the fact they don't want to tell us what's going on here in response to our FOIA request. As I say in our press release, the IRS has a demonstrated record, as proven by Judicial Watch, of abusing taxpayers at the behest of politicians. The IRS obviously has the January 6 documents, so why the cover-up? So we highlighted how there were letters sent to the IRS by these Democrat politicians, yet they tell us there are no records or refuse to respond. Clearly, there's something going on. And I encourage you to go and review Judicial Watch's excellent work exposing the Obama IRS scandal. Do I think his successor in office, or not immediate successor, but Joe Biden as vice president and the gang around him would be any more honest about the use of the IRS? I don't. So I'm hoping President Trump's appointees, I think they're acting at the IRS, use this FOIA lawsuit as an opportunity to expose any misconduct during the Biden regime. And there's this temptation, John McCain wasn't a fan of some of these groups, and we've got records indicating that he wanted some of these groups targeted as well, because he didn't like them philosophically speaking, because he didn't like, quote, money in politics. So he was targeting independent groups that were spending money in politics that he wanted the government to control. So this is a big issue. And, there's been this focus on abuse by the FBI and DOJ, which is important, but one of the reasons we have scandal after scandal of government weaponization and such is because when there are proven cases of weaponization of government, as we have with the IRS, not much is done. Judicial Watch can lead the horse to water in terms of prosecutions, but we don't have the power to prosecute. And so when the IRS targets and suppresses an entire political movement to help what I believe Barack Obama's transparent and successful effort to steal an election in plain sight, and nothing's done about it, why should we be surprised when the next time around the Obama gang and Hillary abuse agencies again to try to rig an election? Why should we be surprised after Biden won in 2020, he would sic every government agency he could on President Trump and his supporters to suppress his candidacy and punish anyone who questioned his election, and made sure they would be hesitant to question any handling of his next election effort, or the election effort, in this case, of Kamala Harris. So look, there's this long line of corruption by federal agencies targeting American citizens in retaliation for the exercise of their First Amendment rights. It happened to the Tea Party. It happened to President Trump. And as far as I'm concerned, it happened to the January 6ers. And I have little doubt that the IRS was part of the Biden regime's jihad against anyone who was involved with, quote, January 6th.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.